Hello and welcome to episode 77 of Just Keep Writing.
A podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And that's Will.
Will's somewhere in the ether. So gentlemen, this week, I'm going to turn it over to you guys here in just a minute. I just want to say how much I appreciate your guys' conversations around the military. We're going to do one more episode about that this week, and maybe circle back to it later next year as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys. You guys are awesome. I can't wait to see what you guys chat about. So thanks for being here and being awesome.
Okay, everyone. So what we're going to do is pick up from the conversation we had previously, where we kind of discussed Nick and his experiences being a veteran in the Army, and also add in my own experiences being a military brat and what that looks like. And I should actually explain what that term even means, because some people may not know. So I guess I'll start there. So the term military brat is referencing someone who is a child of a service member, and they've pretty much spent the majority of their childhood with a father or mother or both, or whatever combination of legal guardian in the service. And the reason the word brat is used is because what is often believed is that, military parents have a lot of guilt about the amount of time that they spend away from their children. So when they are around their children, they spoil them. And so that's where the term comes from, basically. Military brat is that, a lot of military kids get spoiled by their parents because of the guilt that a lot of them have about being overseas, or just the amount of time that they spend away from the kids in general. So, I think that's a good little segue into the full conversation.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it was fun to talk last week. We did talk about my experiences, some of the issues and struggles I deal with when facing PTSD, anxiety and depression and things like that, and how being in the service kind of, doesn't help that, but helps that at the same time there. But I think it's interesting, to kind of talk about the military as a whole and kind of compare our experiences. There's going to be some similarities and differences for sure coming out of this. But I think it's a good perspective, not only to have, a veteran's viewpoint, but to have a kid's viewpoint, what you experienced over, 20 years, there. So
yeah, at least for sure 18, because it was, my dad was in the military from the time I was born until the time I graduated high school. So
your whole life.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Your child growing up there.
Yeah.
It's just kind of crazy. But so we're going to ask each other some questions here. Maybe nothing too difficult or scary, but we'll see what kind of questions come up just from our conversation here. But Brent, I kind of want to open up to you first. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit about, timeline, what your dad did in the military, and places you lived, kind of so we can get an encompassing look at those 18 years?
Yeah. So my dad was in the Army. I was born in Louisiana, so that's where he's from. So his first station outside of Louisiana was actually, it's funny. So before I was born, he was in the military for a little bit, and then he got out. And then when I was born, he got back in again. So he had a few years where he was in the military before I was born. And I think he was stationed in Hawaii, Korea, a couple of different places. Then once he got back in, the first station we went to was Fort Hood, which is in Texas, which actually wasn't too far from Louisiana. So I was a kid. I don't remember a whole lot about that. Then we moved to Alaska, and I remember bits and pieces of Alaska, not enough to have a full picture of it. And it's weird because I was very young, but I guess it being such a jarring difference maybe did something to my mind, because I have little memories of it. And then after Alaska, we moved to we moved to Georgia for the first time. Yeah. We moved to Georgia, And that's when my little brother was born. My sister was born in Alaska. So my little sister was born in Alaska. My little brother was born in Georgia. And after Georgia, we moved to Hawaii. And we were in Hawaii for a few years. And then after Hawaii, we moved to Tennessee. And then after Tennessee, we moved to Panama in Central America. And we were there for a few years. And then from Panama, we came back to Georgia. And Georgia's where he basically did the rest of his time in the military until he retired.
Okay. Well, that's pretty extensive, though. You moved around quite a bit. So
yeah, we moved around a bunch.
And that's kind of like the thing, though, right? We talk about it all the time, as a service member, the life cycle of the Army. You get stationed somewhere, you're only there for 2 or 3 years, and then you're gone because the needs of the Army changes all the time. And I know in my later career, they were like, no, like we need to stabilize families, and we need to give them at least 5 years at a duty station.
Right.
And duty station, that is, what base you're at and stuff like that. That's where your assignment goes to there, just for terminology. But I mean, walk me through the recap of the last question I asked you at the end of that episode, right? What was your favorite thing about growing up in the military and your least favorite thing?
So, my favorite thing is, it's weird because a lot of the things that I loved are some things that I hated, but I loved very much getting to see the world at such a young age. And to be quite honest, it was barely even scratching the surface of the world. But for a kid, moving to all these different places and seeing these different things and, getting to experience the ways that people live was actually like super illuminating. And I think it plays a huge part in like how I am today. And like, the way that I try to view things globally, I try, everyone has their shorts and fallings, but yeah, I think that definitely helped me have more of like a global worldview as opposed to like, you can see it in people who grew up in the same town their whole life and they've never left it. Like that bubble doesn't ever really go any further than like maybe a couple of 100 miles outside of where they live, So that to me was a huge advantage and something I did love about being in the military because I did get to be exposed to so much. Like, who gets to go to the rainforest as a field trip in middle school? Like, that's not something most kids get to talk about.
Serious.
Yeah. So, that was cool. But I also hated it too because like there was never any sense of anything being permanent in terms of like my relationships. Besides for my brother and sister and, immediate family, pretty much nothing was ever permanent. We would move every 2 years, every 2 or 3 years. And, it was almost cruel because it was like by the time you would get used to it, you were already on the way out. And, so and this is growing up in like the 90s. So we didn't necessarily have the social media that you have today to keep in touch with people and to try to like hold on to those connections. So, literally sometimes, especially like in the elementary school years, it was pretty much like literally starting over again and trying to, make friends and fit in, and, just all those things that kids try to do. And yeah, and again, like I said, love and hate. I also loved it too because it was like also a chance to reinvent myself every time. Like, you got to go somewhere, you got a blank slate. You could be, you could be different. You didn't have to. The embarrassing thing you did at school last year, no one knows about here because no one even knows you. So you get the chance to sort of rebuild yourself.
You get out of jail free card for embarrassment.
Yeah, like literally, or like if you are like, and it's so funny because the way you would be perceived in each place would be slightly different. Like, you would go to, like I would be in Tennessee, I was like a huge freaking nerd. Like it was like, oh God, like, yeah, terrible nerd. But I get to Panama and still a nerd, like definitely, I think that's just my core DNA. But I like also started playing more sports. And so it's like, oh, well, he's kind kind of like a athletic nerd or whatever. But so it's like everywhere you got to go, you got the chance to sort of reinvent yourself and kind of become something different. And so honestly though, the biggest thing I think I appreciate about having moved from place to place is that I'm definitely a writer today because of those experiences. Because outside of my family, stories were the one thing that was always permanent and forever present. So that's why I think I gravitated towards storytelling, because it was something I could control, and something that it never left.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you're experiencing so many different things, like how we have a problem now as adults turning off our creative muscle, and as a kid, your imagination is the only thing you have sometimes. So I can only imagine like the creativity that you were able to experience, moving to different places, seeing what you see. I mean, you go home from Georgia, Louisiana, you throw in Alaska in there and Panama, like that's an adventure on its own through a book series, right?
Yeah, people always tell me that. They always tell me like, "Oh, your life sounds like you could write it down." I'm like, for me, I'm like, "Oh, it's just my life." Like I don't think of it in terms of it being like an adventure or exciting or anything like that. It's like, oh, that was just my normal.
Yeah, I feel that. Well, my next question for you though, like you brought up the term military brat.
Yeah,
how do you feel about that term? Like, I mean, it's a little derogatory, but at the same time, it is a little accurate too.
There is some accuracy in it for sure. There's definitely some accuracy in it, and I think because there is some guilt that parents feel about sometimes my dad, and honestly, we actually have moved more places if my dad had brought us to every place he was assigned. There were times he would get assigned someplace else and he wouldn't bring us. And so he'd be gone for like a year and a half. And, so it's like your parents, and this happened multiple times throughout my childhood where he'd be gone for like a year or a year and a half. And then all of a sudden you come back and it's like, I think he always tells this one story about like how like he had to leave before my brother was born to go to Iraq and the first Gulf War. Yeah. So he left before my brother was born. And by the time he came back, my brother didn't know who he was. So he went to go give my brother a hug, and my brother ran away screaming because he was like, he didn't know him. And my dad was like, that broke his heart. Like, he was like, that like just made him like, sad. Like young kid didn't know who you were. Yeah. And so when you have situations like that, like I can only imagine being a parent. Of course you want to spoil your kids. You're like, I've been gone. Like, they don't even know me. Like, I got to, do what I got to do. And there's definitely some truth to it, but I think that I don't necessarily hate the term. I don't hate it. I think it's just it's one of those things I don't even think about in terms of like being derogatory or not. It's just kind of like a thing we say. But there's definitely truth to it. And I think if anything, parents also worry, and I think that's where the spoiled part comes from too, because I think parents worry that like, how is this affecting my kid? Like, how is my life and the way I live it and the things I'm asking them to do, how does it affect them? And I think a lot of military parents worry about that.
Yeah. I mean, especially, I think a lot has changed since like the Vietnam era, because my mom's a military brat. My grandfather's a Vietnam veteran, and her upbringing is a lot different than the upbringings that I saw, and things that you experienced, they're vastly different. I think a lot has changed, not only like in how parents view it, but how the Army is trying to help parents it be a little bit more stabilized there in the family centric aspect of things. Another question I got for you too. Tell me about high school. High school, like I think last time you mentioned you went through 2 different high schools.
Yeah, so high school is one of those awful experiences. Well, not entirely awful, but so when we got to Georgia and I was going to high school, I was thinking that finally at long last, high school is the one place I can go to all 4 years and have like something that is like stable for once. Like that's what my hope was. And the thing was, so what happened, ninth and 10th grade, my father was, we were still living on the military base. But after 10th grade, he was making a transition to almost being retired. So as part of that transition, he wanted to move off base. And, you know, housing being what housing is, the house that they bought was in a different county. So I ended up having to go to a different high school for 11th and 12th grade. He was still in the military, but, you know, he was just going through that whole that long process of getting to retirement. And, I hated it. God, I hated the second high school so much. It was I had, like, you know, most people talk about their high school reunions or, you know, whatever. Like, I have no intention of ever going to a high school reunion. It has no sentimental value to me whatsoever. Like, I made some friends, but nothing I would ever consider like a close connection. And it was just like, I hated it. I wanted no parts of it. I was miserable every day of like 11th and 12th grade. I like missed the friends that I made in 9th and 10th grade. Because it was like 9th and 10th grade was so good. I had so many friends, and it felt like, you know, a bit of belonging, and then that just all got snatched away, and I hated it. Yeah, and honestly, I definitely had some resentment towards my dad at that point in particular, because I was like, you couldn't just let me have one thing, like one thing to myself, and so it was definitely some anger and resentment there. And we definitely fought a lot. we definitely had we butted heads quite a bit when I was in high school.
I understandable though. I mean, that's a very large growing point for a lot of people, you know, emotionally and stuff like that. You know, puberty's there, and that makes everyone a little crazy, right?
Right.
Especially like you're missing out on so much, and like you're starting to realize that at that age. I feel like before I got a stack of questions over here on my end here. Before I dive any deeper to the little bit more emotional ones here, I'm going to flip the plate, switch it to you, right?
Okay.
Let you ask a couple questions if you have any.
All right.
That we can get that going.
So I got one question since we're talking about, you know, kids in the military. What would you tell one of your kids if they told you they wanted to join?
Depending on which kid asks.
Oh, okay. That makes a difference.
To me, it makes a difference because I think some personalities are a better fit for the military than others. But like, if one of my kids said, "Hey, I'm going to go to the military," I'm going to ask them, "What do you want to do?" Because that's going to determine really how I feel about that. Because if I got a kid, I got a kid that's all jock. He all he wants to do is play sports. I got a little girl that wants to be a cheerleader. No one ever told her she needs to be a cheerleader, but she is straight princess cheerleader all the time. It is just her personality, and pink's the best thing ever. And then my oldest is just a science nerd. He wants science. I think the biggest thing I would explain to him was always like, you're signing up to possibly die. No matter what you do in the military, you could be asked to give your life up, and make sure they're okay with that. Because I think once you get to a point where you're okay with that, my chances are really low. It's like, no, your chances are low of dying in a car crash, but it happens. And every day you take that risk.
Right.
If you're going to join the military, I feel like that's something at least I would tell my kids and make sure they were okay with. Like, you're okay with dying and leaving this world and leaving, you know, all of us. If you're okay with that, then, you know, I'm going to support you.
For sure. All right. So, yeah, because my little brother's in the military, so that's why I asked the question. Because of all the three of us, he's the one that joined up. And, we always knew he would, though. So it didn't surprise any of us when he finally did decide to join the military.
Yeah, that's super interesting to see that, though.
Yeah, no, we all kind of knew. We had the idea. We're like, yeah, he's definitely going to be the military guy.
No, okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to ask, what was your dad's job in the military, and then what's your brother's job in the military?
So he was a drill sergeant, my dad. My dad was a drill sergeant.
For
He
how
actually,
long?
dang, for a
Like,
few
do
years.
you remember what he did during the Gulf War versus like because
He was
drills are
infantry. He was definitely infantry.
All
Like,
right.
yeah, no, he was infantry. I just don't remember exactly. So I do know this. So I know like he was a paratrooper. He jumped out of the planes a lot, which resulted in a whole host of issues later.
Yeah.
He also was a ski assault instructor in Alaska.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, and he also did some long range rifle training shit. I don't know exactly what it's called. So yeah, he was definitely infantry. My brother is logistics. He's a captain. So he's an officer, whereas my dad was enlisted.
Yep.
And my brother does logistics.
I feel like your dad may have given some advice of
He definitely did.
finishing school and take a job that is going to kill your body.
Yeah. No, my dad. Well, see, that's the thing with my dad. He was like, if you want to join, you can join, but I'm going to be there when you're talking to the recruiter because they're not going to bullshit you. And so he made sure he was there, and he definitely guided my brother the right way.
Good. I mean, that's awesome to hear because some part of me regrets not going Air Force at one point in my career. Another part of me is like glad I didn't too.
The Marines tried to get me. The Marines tried very, very, very hard to get me. And they would have actually. There was two things that kept them from getting me. Otherwise, I probably would be talking to you, or maybe not actually. But it was the don't ask, don't tell. And it was that the Iraq War had just started. Those two things made me go, no.
Wait a minute. Let's pause there, right? And that's the funny thing is I actually joined because of the surge.
See, and I guess being a military kid and seeing the results of some of this stuff, I was like, oh hell no, I'm good. And then I was like, I'm not. And I guess which is kind of crazy. The bigger thing was the don't ask, don't tell, though, more so than the Iraq. It was just like I was like, I'm not joining something where I have to hide a part of myself. I was like, I am sick of hiding who I am anymore. And so, that was the bigger motivator. Otherwise, they might have got me. Because the thing is, there's a reason that I think that there's a high percentage of military kids that end up joining the military is because we understand that lifestyle. We may not know every bit of terminology and every bit of logistics and tactics and whatnot, but we understand the routines of it. We understand the pitfalls. We also understand the good parts. And I think, and it's also normal for us. For a lot of us, it's normal. Like it's funny because people ask me this all the time. They're like, were you ex-military? And I'm like, no, never. But I think it's just being the child of one. Like there's things you pick up.
I feel like there's certain disciplinary things that you guys get. Yeah. And there's certain, I feel like you're also better mentally prepared for adversity too.
Yes, that is also, so that's one of the benefits and also one of the, like, again, everything I think with being a military kid is like a double-edged sword. So the things that I see rattle people who weren't like military kids, I'm like, what? Like that's really disturbing you that much? And it's like, for me, I'm like, I had to do that when I was in elementary school. Like how people worry about, moving away. And the amount of anxiety I see that people have about moving somewhere new or moving somewhere, and I can't relate to it because I'm like, well, I didn't have a choice. I did that all the time. Like I learned very early on that like nothing's permanent, nothing is forever, and I think that's a lesson that like we learn in a lot of tough ways. Yeah, and in some ways it does make us resilient. It makes us strong, but I think sometimes also we can be a bit detached from people too, because it's like we don't trust that they're going to stay around. And I think it's hard for us to get into deeper relationships sometimes because we have this understanding very early at a young age that like nothing lasts forever. And I don't know if it's a good or bad thing for kids to learn that lesson that early. Like, I don't know. Like, I think I think kids should know, like, should feel like some stuff is going to last forever. So yeah, if for anybody listening, you're probably gonna hear me with a lot of conflicted feelings because I do have a lot of just like complicated feelings about like being a military kid.
But I mean, that's why we're here, right? Like,
yeah,
it's not cut and dry one way or another.
No, absolutely.
It's interesting take.
Yeah,
so.
No, it's very like, it's just weird. It's very hard to like negotiate and navigate it sometimes. Yeah,
100%. So
okay, so I guess okay, so next thing I would ask is like, we kind of talked about this before. I said, what did you miss? But what don't you miss about like being in the military?
Man, I don't miss bad leadership. Like there's so much toxic leadership in the military because like people are hung on to the way they were brought up 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you were brought up a certain way in the military and kind of raised in the military in that way, right? But like, there's no excuse for being a shitty leader. Like, making people just do things to make them suffer because you're bored. Like, I don't miss that at all. I don't miss like having to work 5:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock at night and just stand there all day long because we were expected to be ready to do something. It's like, really, like I could be bettering myself with school. Like I could be bettering myself like by going to the gym and actually working out the way my body needs to rather than just running every day and doing sit-ups and push-ups every day. Like,
right.
You know what I mean?
Which is not effective.
No, it only gets you so far. Like, they're finally starting to realize that, and they're changing their PT standards, their physical fitness standards. But yeah, I don't miss bad leadership, especially when it came to like captains and officers and stuff like that. If they were bad leadership, your whole life was ruined. I watched my last captain kick people out of the military and strip away all their benefits, even after they had served for 4 years. They had 6 months left, and he just chapter them out because they couldn't make weight. They couldn't pass the PT test. And it's like, they're on their way out, dude. They did their term, like, and you're just doing it just because you can.
Yeah.
Just because you can.
There's something to be said about like how the military doesn't always attract the best people.
No, like, I said it on the last one. We're bottom of the barrel.
Yeah. Well, and the thing, I think you get one or the other. You get really honorable people with integrity, or you get these people who just like to have power and like the idea of feeling superior over someone else. And
well, not only that, I had 4 guys underneath me in Louisiana, all of which were given a choice of being in jail for 5 years or going to join the military. I'll let you know how it went out. All 4 of them got kicked out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but however, you put a rifle in their hand, you teach them tactics, and you go deploy with them, and they're really good in that scenario, in that violent situation. All other things they suck at. Like,
and that's one of these awful things that I think I always remember this from like Man on Fire when they were talking about like everybody has a gift. Mm-hmm. And they were like, some people's gift is killing. And it's like, that's a horrible gift to have. And God, like, what does that do to a person? But that's some people's gift. Yeah. And yeah. Okay. So I guess this is my next question. So, all right. So with the military's discipline, regiment, like kind of structure that it has, do you feel like you've transposed that to your own writing at all? Like, has anything about the military's discipline carried into how you write?
No, and that's because I'm me, and I flushed that out of my system. The first thing I decided to do when I get out is I'm sleeping in. I'm not gonna be strict on time hacks because I was always naturally a person to show up early, so like that wasn't different for me. But like,
yeah.
I don't know. It was just one of those things. Like, I'm not going to get up early to go do stuff. I'm going to live the way I want to live now. But there are some disciplinary things that I feel like have stayed with me. And one of them is goals and objectives, right? If I set an objective, hey, I'm going to do this by then, like I have a good time staying on track and make sure I'm planning accordingly to know which days I can take off and which days I can't. So that's kind of helped me in my writing. I think more so it's been the experience that's helped me with the writing than the disciplinary side of things.
That's so interesting because like so even though I wasn't in the military, but the discipline that my father had in our household definitely carries into like the way I carry myself, I guess, throughout publishing in general. Like I know a lot of people, I was like, God, how are you doing so many different things? Like, how are you doing so much shit? And I'm very much like, I need to always be looking for an objective, a goal. Like, what am I doing next? And I think that is my father's discipline just resonating in like, I'm starting to find a better balance in it. But definitely when I was like younger, it was very much like, what's the next thing? What's the objective? Finish this, move on to the next thing. Like, it was like always like, it was never taking the time to celebrate. It was always just you finish the thing, move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. And I'm finally getting to a place where I'm trying to like, I'm making peace with the fact that I'm probably never going to stop having that mentality, but also finding a way to mold it and leave room for like celebration and rest and all those things because the military doesn't really give you the space for that. And I think I definitely internalized that and took it into my own writing and like how I approach writing anyway. And so that's why I'm always doing something. Like it's always something that I'm doing. And people in not just in writing life, but in my real life, actually like, well, do you sleep? Like, like how do you have a different 24 hours with us? And it's funny because I'm like, no, that's not the case. But it's just like it was my dad. It's like boom, 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 boom. You gotta keep moving. You gotta have the next objective or the next how he would phrase it. Like you gotta get over that hill. You gotta get to the next hill. You gotta keep moving.
Get over the hump, right?
Yeah, the hump. Yeah. Like you gotta get over the hump. Yeah, that's what he would. Yeah, and I internalized that, and I think like it's good and bad. Like it's good because like I think it kind of prepared me for the amount of rejection that you experience in publishing. Because like I didn't even take the time to absorb the emotional impact of it. It was just like, okay, well that's done. Next thing, like so
Oh, I feel that one. So I've gotten up to like 6-7 rejections, and to this day, like I've never like thought about it.
Yeah, no, like, I don't get fazed by it the way that I think other people do. Sometimes it'll sting a little bit, but it's not like I know some people who will literally like just. And this isn't to say that if you do this you're wrong or you're bad. That's not what I'm saying. But I've seen people just like mope about it the whole day, and I'm like, I can't do that. Like it's not. I'm not built that way. And I think in part it's because of like dad's military discipline and how he would just bring it into the household.
No, 100%. I mean, you bring that up, like how busy you are, and then I start to realize like, oh man, in college I worked part time. I was taking 18 credits a semester. Like I was dating, like. Yeah. What am I doing now? Well, I'm in a master's. I'm working full time. I'm married, with 3 kids out of the blue now. And it's like, and I've got side projects I'm working on. It's like, oh man, like I really like, okay, that did stick with me. Hopefully that transfers, once I'm done with school and can be full time into writing and stuff like that here too. I think that will transfer over. But oh man, you brought that up and I didn't even think about it. I was like,
yeah,
you're not wrong.
The discipline stays. It's just
it manifests in different ways now, and it's sometimes maybe not the easiest to understand.
Yeah,
I guess on my end.
Yeah, so that's definitely something I've been kind of trying to be cognizant of and just like accept it for what it is, but also try to like approach it in a healthier way, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so question for you, Brent. Okay. A little bit more on the emotional side here.
That's fine. We could do this. I already got stuffed up nose anyway, so it works out.
You brought up Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yeah.
I remember when that was pulled away. And the big joke for the week was, hey, so-and-so, we don't care about your boyfriend anymore. Just go out and tell us now. We already knew, right?
Yeah.
You just joke around like that. But it was like one of those, when that came out, some people were like, they really cared that it was pulled apart. And other people were like, if you're willing to die next to me, I don't care what you are.
Yeah.
And so I saw this weird transition of it went from like you weren't allowed to talk about it to like, hey, we really don't care if you are. Like, as long as you are a good person, you're here with us, like you want to fight with us side by side. But I wanted to know on your front of things, and the way you grew up and stuff like that. How did that policy affect your home?
So it didn't in terms. So the thing with it is that like, my dad was very much like, even long before it came about, he was like, look, if you're going to be in the foxhole with me and we're getting bombs, so I don't give a damn like what you're doing. Right. But he told me actually a story about a soldier he had in Hawaii. And he always used that as this example of like, like trying to like let go of expectations. He was like, look, this guy was ripped. He was huge. Like, he was in better shape than all of us. He was a better shot than all of us. And, and all the guys like loved him. They thought of him as like the man's man. And then one day the guy had to go home because his boyfriend died in a car crash. And none of them knew he had a boyfriend. And my dad said like that one soldier, for him at least, he was like, that was his first real exposure to it beyond like stereotypes that you would see. And he was like, it changed his mindset. And I do think because of the two parents, when I came out, it was actually my dad that took it a lot better.
Really?
Yeah. And when I tell people that, everyone's kind of like, that's not what I would expect. You said your dad was a drill sergeant. You said your dad was this in the Army. He was the kind of dad that in the Army, like the other kids in the neighborhood were scared of our dad. Like if he told them something, they would listen. Like he was that father that everybody was like, nah, your dad's a badass. We're not messing with him. And so that's why people were like, he's the one that took it easier. But yeah, he took it like it was nothing. But I think what happened is that his nonchalant of being nonchalant about it, and my mom being a little more like bothered by it, it created this kind of like weird, we just don't talk about it in the household, where like, so when the whole don't ask, don't tell thing like was repealed, it wasn't really a big topic of discussion. And I think part of it was just like this undercurrent of like, we know it's here in our household, but like we're not talking about it yet. And yeah. Now, personally, outside of that, I actually was it's like early 20s. I was dating this major in the Army, and even when it was repealed, he wasn't going to tell because he was like, that's still going to affect my career. Like, yeah, even though they say that, it's fine, I know like if I was to be out, it would affect my career advancement.
Well, you still got it that as a major, like he's got some time in, right? Like 10 years by that point. Yeah. And he's dealing with people that have been in for 20 to 30 years. Like that type of mentality just doesn't go away with a policy change.
Right. And that was pretty much his point. He was like, that wasn't why we ended things, but it was like it was a big topic of discussion because me being young, idealistic, and righteous, of course, expected him to like, well, like, hey, it's over with now. Like, you should be open. And he was like, no, that's just not that's not the reality for me. Like, I'm black and I'm gay. Like, I can't expect to advance in my career if I was to come out.
Yeah, no, and that's the sad realization of what what the military was at that time. And I know it's, things have changed over the years. I know there's a lot of discussion, when it comes to a soldier being transgender and stuff like that. And that's for them to figure out, what policies they want, I guess. But I wanted to kind of circle back to who you are as a person, Brent, and the way you were brought up and living and moving around and kind of what your experience is being a military brat, but also being black, because that's something your dad was infantry. That's not. I'm going to say this right now. It's not common to see a black man in the infantry. At least from the places I was stationed, there was like one or two black guys per 200 of white guys, Hispanics, even people from Guam and, you know, Polynesian islands and stuff like that. Like that's unique to me. That in my experience, like what was that like for you though? Because I'm just back even in the 90s. You guys were probably the only black family in a lot of these circles. How was that growing up for you guys?
So it's weird. So like dad was infantry, but he just had, I don't think he realizes it sometimes, but like my dad, like he's like this force of nature when he would like come into rooms, and like he just commanded like everybody's respect. Like, and not to say race wasn't an issue he had to deal with. I definitely think it was, but he just was that guy. Like, I don't know, in a way he was almost, I'm trying to think of a good comparable here, but he just commanded the respect of like anybody he worked with, and they all loved him. Like he's, to this day, like he'll have soldiers who worked with him 20 something years ago randomly send him a letter in the mail, be like, "Hey, Sergeant Lambert, I just want to hit you up. Like, I remember our time together. Like, you were an amazing leader, blah, blah, blah." Like, so I'm not going to speak for him and say that he didn't deal with it as much as I think, you would think, but he just had this personality. Like, he just knew how to like command people's respect. So, I didn't feel the racism on base. When the racism came into play was when we went off base, when we lived in these places and we went to the towns or the cities or whatever outside of the base, is when I typically felt when the racism would crop up. So like my dad actually, he definitely had the respect of his fellow soldiers. But I guess when it was the weirdest for me, I think, and when I really started thinking more globally as a person, was when we went to Panama. It was very weird because that's when I was starting to become, I think, more and more conscious of like Black people's place in American history and how horrific it's been for so much of it. And so coming to the country of Panama, which we bombed pretty relentlessly, and seeing like burnt out cars where homeless kids were living in the cars because there was nowhere else for them to go, or seeing people walking around missing limbs because of the bombs we dropped, or, seeing like whole neighborhoods flattened that had never been repaired because of the damage we did. It became weird for me because I was like, I'm part of an apparatus that did this, and yet this country also did these horrible things to people like me too. So what the hell are we doing here? And I think that was the beginning of the creeping arguments that like me and my father would continue to get into for some years afterwards. And, we just had this like, we were butting heads. And I think it was because of my growing consciousness about like being Black and America's place in the world, and like, how it's weird to kind of be part of that imperial arm. And then, my dad's role in it. And, it wasn't like I felt like he was like this evil figure now that like served the Dark Empire or something. It wasn't like that, but it was more like, Dad, you're such a good, honorable guy with this integrity. Like, doesn't this seem wrong to you? Like, doesn't this feel wrong? Like, and so, yeah, that's when it got complicated for me, I think, was right when we moved to Panama. Because before then, I had moved to bases in America. So I didn't have to actually see what America's power could do. But like when I went to Panama, I got to see firsthand the aftermath of what us delivering military power onto a country actually looks like.
Yeah.
And there was actually, so the middle school I went to in Panama was outside of the base. So like, there was the base, and then we had a couple of miles away was the middle school. So they had the middle school completely fenced off, so on and so forth. The reason they have to have it fenced off is because people would protest. People would throw rocks at our buses. They were like, they were upset about, America's role in things. And, so my mom freaked out a little bit. She was like, oh my God, like he's got to go over there and deal with this. Honestly, it wasn't as bad as like they made it sound. It made it sound much worse. I think it was just one day out the year that people would protest. I think it was commemorating when we first started bombing them. But it's just it was weird to be at a point where I was growing and like understanding my own blackness and being in a place that had been attacked by America. It was a weird combination of things to be reckoning with at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, and that's, what grade were you in then? Was that?
So I got into Panama the second half of my 5th grade year, and then I was there for my 6th and 7th grade year. So that's that weird middle school age where your body's growing in weird ways, and
yeah. And that's also like, that's super young for you to get, like, be able to look at the destruction that's being caused. And I think that's the advantage and disadvantage, right? Double-edged swords there of being a military kid. You saw firsthand the cost of war.
And my dad was very honest about it. He never like sugarcoated. He has this philosophy where like if you're old enough to ask, you're old enough to get an answer. So he never sugarcoated anything with us. And I remember actually when we first got to Panama, they sat all the families down in the room. They pulled up this map of the country, and they were like, "You see these red zones? You don't go to these red zones because Americans are not like there, and you may be kidnapped, and we may never find you." And they, so that was like one of the first things we sat down, and they told us this. And so on the way, I remember on the way from the airport, on the way to where we were going to be staying, well, we had to stay in the base hotel. I remember seeing a bunch of like naked kids in this burnt out train car. And, I asked my dad, I was like, what's going on here? And he was like, that's a remnant of a train we bombed. And, they haven't cleaned it up, or they haven't had a chance, the infrastructure to clean it up. Yeah. So definitely. I got to see that like very early on and understand like the actual cost of what happens when war happens.
Yeah.
And the aftermath.
For sure. I know cognizant of time right now. I've got 2 more questions I want to ask you.
All right.
Right. And diving a little bit deeper here, you've expressed a couple times that you had some issues. You and Dad had gotten into a few fights growing up in high school.
Yeah.
Kind of walk me through that scenario. But walk it through me as a writer. Okay. As a writer, how would you get this dynamic of you being aware of how Black people have been affected by American policies and how that's translated, from what you've seen in war and how that affected your relationship with your father?
Okay. So if I was to approach it as a form of storytelling, of course, I would have to be the main character here, I guess, in this thing. So I think you would have to, one, maybe do like, you would have to set up something to really show like where I am learning about like Blackness. So you'd have to show me in school, because that's where I'm learning this stuff, right? I'm learning about it in school. I'm learning about these history lessons in regards to, and thank God I had educators who were willing to be honest about it. But, learn these things about slavery and the Atlantic slave trade, and how, these European powers basically tore these countries apart for resources. And then also, being in middle school and showing how privileged I am, and that I'm living in Panama in Central America, and I'm going to a school that just for Americans. And if you were Panamanian and you want to go to this school, you actually had to pay for it like a private school. So we had some Panamanians of like rich families that went to school with us. And we literally had a huge fence around our school. So you would have to show that setting, I think, to really establish like the privilege at work here. And there's one incident in my middle school life that I would use to sort of juxtapose that power dynamic that, I had to learn about early on. So it was after school one day. Me and some kids were playing basketball, and a trans sex worker comes running up to the fence and is like, panicked, frantic, like speaking Spanish, like just like. And so we had a friend with us who spoke Spanish, and he was like, she's asking for help. Like, she was with two soldiers and they didn't know she was trans. And now she's scared they're going to try to kill her because they pulled a gun out on her. And so this is after school. So we're like, what the hell do we do? We get a janitor and was like, hey, you got to let her in, let her in. And he was like, no, I can't let her in. She's not American. And I understood then how fucked up it was, because I'm like, this is someone who needs help. They are literally in danger, and we can't help them because she's not American. And we had to basically, So like, if I was a writer and I wanted to establish like the conflict that I was feeling at that time, that's the incident I would do to illustrate that.
It's so crazy because you bring that up, and my first thought was the security risk of her.
Yeah.
How does the janitor of all people determine the security risk, right? Yeah. I just went through so many different processes there. But I can totally understand how that would affect you as a kid, though. Like, you see someone in need and you can't help them. You're helpless at that point. Yeah,
and we were all upset. We were all yelling at the janitor. We're like, no, she needs help. Like, let her in. Like, what is wrong with you? And like, he wouldn't do it. And so we basically had to stay there and talk with her and like keep her close by until like the police could show up. But like, she was completely terrified the entire time.
Yeah.
And, it was like that. I think that incident like embedded itself in my memory. And if I was a writer, I would use that incident to really show the moment of kind of like awakening of like, okay, this is some fucked up privilege here that
something's not right.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man.
So, yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, no, that stuck with me forever.
Now, let's bring that to full circle with your dad and your guys' relationship. Did you feel like that is the point in your relationship with your, not only your dad but your parents as a whole, start to change when you started asking more questions and realizing everything?
Yeah, Panama was a turning point for me for sure, because it was like I was old enough to ask questions, and I was also old enough to find out answers for myself. And this was also too, like, I didn't just go to school with Americans. Like I was saying, there was a lot of rich Panamanian kids who went to school with us. So I learned from them some of the things we've done to them and some of the ways like we've hurt their country. And, by becoming friends with them and learning about them, I started to get this more global perspective, and I started questioning everything. It was like, well, why do we do this? Why is this here? Like, why did we do that? Like, yeah. And so I think it just kind of like it snowballed, and it just kept snowballing for years afterwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're establishing personal relationships with those people that are affected by our government's actions at that point, and in a sense, reaping benefit from that unknowingly.
Right. And I think that's why I get so irritated when discussions of privilege come up, and you have people go like, well, I mean, I may be white, but I'm poor. Or, they may be like, oh, I may be straight, but I'm still black. It was like, you're not getting it. You're missing the ways that you were privileged, and you don't even realize it. And I think being in Panama was like my crash course almost in that concept.
Really? It's interesting. Yeah, Marshall.
So I know I haven't said much during this episode, but I you've brought up privilege a couple of times, and I can't help but it keeps popping into my head some of the conversations I've been having lately, just about trying to communicate to people like privilege is not about having money. It's not about having, it's about having to deal with certain things that no one else will have to deal with because of something like the color of your skin, right? So Nick brought up earlier, having to do with, not very many black folks being in infantry, right? And then you brought up something very specific about being in another country and seeing what America is doing while they're out there, right? So my major question for you, Brent, is how do we deal with these type of issues in our writing and get that across, especially for writing like sci-fi and fantasy, right? Because I think the thing is we miss those little I'm channeling Will here a little bit. We miss those little nuances a little bit, about like what we have to deal with based off of our privilege and how can we build better worlds and stuff like that. I don't know if that helps or is even a question, but I'm just really curious based on what you've been saying, how your experience, because I mean, for me, and I've said this before on the show, being black and being part of a very small rural society and being the only black kid in my class, for example, like how I bring something else to the table. So what do you do as far as your writing, and that kind of thing?
No, absolutely. So I like to, I tend to go with multiple POV stories. So, I always try to think who's getting screwed and who's getting screwed the most and make sure that they have a voice in that story. Because that's usually where you're going to start unpacking the privileges and inherent injustices in any world that you build. Is you got to think about like who is losing here, like who is being left out of the conversation. So like if there's a world where I'm just gonna be very generic here, but like only men can do magic, well, you got to have a point of view of a woman. Then you got to show like what the society looks like for her and how she's being kept out of certain things that she probably wants. That would be my quickest answer. Just always think about like once you build your world, once you think about like, and when I say build your world, I don't even necessarily mean just secondary worlds, but like you have to world build, even if it's a near future fantasy or sci-fi, whatever. Near future, contemporary, whatever. You have to still do some world building. So think about who is getting screwed the hardest in your world and who is being unfairly left out of society, and make sure that they have a substantial voice in your story. So I think if you look at some of the most groundbreaking, like challenging fantasy and science fiction out there today, they have those voices in there. Like I think of The Unbroken from C.L. Clarke. Like her main character is a conscript, somebody who literally was torn from their home, and they're having to navigate that world. And that would be my encouragement. Think about, and even if you don't necessarily give that person a POV, make sure that that person is not a background in your story. Like there's always going to be, as long as we're dealing with capitalism and we're dealing with all the imperialism, colonialism, all those that history, there's always people inherently that are going to be left out. So make sure that you include those stories in your work.
That's in line with what we learned from Malka Older over the summer in our course. Obviously, she's really good at writing resistance stories. And her advice for us was implement a new policy and then write from the aspect of the people that it hurts. And that's your start of a rebellion, right? Like, and Brent, I liked how you brought that kind of full circle there for us and let us, give me and Marshall a reminder here, of what we've learned in the past. But I think it's important to, look at who's being affected by all the actions all the way around with that stuff, especially when it comes to military stuff. Like, because there's a good guy and bad guy, and I'm going to quote that because there's really not. There's people who do things and people that are affected by those things.
Right. Well, and I mean, if you really want to get into the weeds of it, you have who is fighting for a power and who is fighting against the power, and how and how are those people framed differently depending on the point of view? Because 100%. When you're fighting against the interests of rich people, you're a terrorist. When you're fighting for the interests of rich people, you're a soldier. And so it's like you have to, you have to be willing to, I think. And this is, I think any writer like this, you've got to be able to step outside of yourself and really dig into the mechanics of your world and how it works. And that can be a little bit uncomfortable because, like I said, just, being a kid in Panama, having to understand, like, we did this. We've hurt this country irreparably. Like, that's uncomfortable. That's not an easy pill to swallow. So when you're building your worlds, I think you got to be ready to confront those hard truths and just, accept that, like, you might find yourself in some of these privileges that you're writing about and trying to critique. And, the thing about privilege is that no one's saying that you should feel guilty for it. It's about recognizing that you have it and using it to help those who don't have it. And so my advice, that'd be my advice. Just look for who's getting screwed over. I
like it. Marshall, do you have other questions? I know you kind of hopped in here a little later on the back end.
Yeah, I may have missed part of this, but no, I love listening to you guys talk about this stuff, and for me, like, I don't know, I really feel like having conversations about our past and having conversations about what we've been through as writers does a number of different things as far as our readers knowing where we are coming from, but at the same time we bring a certain level of expertise to our work as well, right? And I think when it comes down to race and you guys talking about the military and stuff like that, I mean, it's really important to have these conversations, I think. And so I really am stoked that we did these 2 episodes for sure. So thank you for putting yourselves out there, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's fun. And I think for anybody out there listening, if you take anything away from this, it is that own your own story. And it's okay to, own the good, the bad, the ugly, all parts of it. Because, like, I've probably said this before in previous episodes, but as an author, you got to bleed on the page. And, the only way to bleed on the page is that, like, sometimes you got to cut yourself. And that sometimes means going over the parts of your life that aren't necessarily, the best parts, or even sometimes there's joyful tears too. So sometimes you might gotta bleed the happy out, but just own your story. That would be my if you take anything from these 2 episodes.
For sure. And I just hope people, take it, learn a little bit on our experiences on how to get those types of characters right or wrong, depending on how you want to do it there. But yeah, that was kind of my kind of focus, is making sure that, like, people had firsthand accounts and of what it's like, 1, to be in the service, and 2, like, being raised by the service in a sense, being a child of a military service member. But it's been fun. I feel like Brent, you and I could talk a couple more hours about all this stuff, because I got a slew of questions still that we didn't get through. So maybe we'll have a few more episodes next year for it. So.
Part 3. Yeah. No, this was great. I'm glad we did it. I hope everyone took something good away from it, and definitely enjoyed the conversation.
What I think might be interesting too is, based off these 2 episodes, letting the community kind of sit on them for a little bit and then throw some questions back at us for maybe a follow-up, because we do have a lot of folks in our community that do write military characters or worlds with militaries functioning within them. So I think it might be really helpful to circle back at some point as well.
No, totally.
So,
love it. Sit on it, ask a few questions, we'll do a Q&A.
There we go. And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.